Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MtG Traders. My name is Taryn, and this is the Dominaria Set Review for Red. Alright, so we've done white, we've done blue, we've done black. Let's get into red and see what we have in store. Starting with Bloodstone Goblin. This is a 2-mana 2/2 Goblin Warrior. Whenever you cast a spell, if that spell was kicked, Bloodstone Goblin gets +1/+1 and gains Menace until end of turn. So this is a very kind of specific ability for Draft and Sealed. Otherwise, it's just kind of a 2/2 bear, which is fine in red. But it's also got a nice ability in that it does give it kind of pseudo evasion if you can get a kicker off, more than like 1 or 2 times in a match. But from what I've seen, the kicker costs are kind of expensive, so I feel like the Goblin here is just going to kind of be relegated to some bulk status in the Draft and Sealed. Of course, this won't see any kind of standard play. Moving on here, we have Champion of the Flame. I cannot wait to build a standard deck around this card. It's so good. 2-mana 1/1 Human Warrior with Trample. Champion of the Flame gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to this. This is an all-star card if you get into a lot of auras and equipments in Draft and Sealed. Also in Standard, I'm going to be building an Izzet standard deck around this, an Izzet Auras deck. Cannot wait. I'm so pumped. There's so many good cards in Standard right now for auras. This card is one of my favorites. Can't wait to play with it. I know it's kind of feeble and that it's just a 1/1 here, but at the same time, it gets huge when we have enchantments, auras, and equipments on top of it. So make sure to look out for this card exactly into like your first pull, your first pack, and see if you can continue to get into auras and equipments later on in the match. If you get into multiples of these, you are winning. Moving up here, we have Fervent Strike. It is a 1-mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains First Strike and Haste until end of turn. This card is pretty good. It's not kind of a combat trick. It gives First Strike, and that's good enough for me. It's not that good of a combat trick personally. It is a common though, so you're going to see it quite often. But in Draft and Sealed, this card is just fine. Of course, won't see any kind of standard play. Moving up here, we have Fiery Intervention, a 5-mana sorcery. Choose one. Fiery Intervention deals 5 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. I like the option here because we do have quite a few artifacts in the actual sealed pool here that are going to be kind of annoying. This, of course, won't see standard play, but 5 damage to target creature is fine, I guess, for sideboard tech if you want to bring that into a sealed or draft pool into the main board in game 2. This could be something you want to bring in for extra removal. Besides that, it's a card I really don't like because it is highly costed. Moving on here, we have Fight with Fire. Love the art on this one. A 3-mana sorcery with kicker for 6. Again, see the kicker, how they're expensive they are. Fight with Fire deals 5 damage to target creature if that spell was kicked. It deals 10 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures instead. So 3 mana, deal 5 damage to target creature. It's an uncommon, so that's pretty decent. Basically like a Bombard or something like that. But if it's kicked for 6, which means it's a 9-mana spell, it actually can do 10 damage divided among any number of creatures you want. So basically a board wipe for us if we can help it. I like this card a lot for the 3-mana cost, just regular cost. But if we can get into the the 9 mana in the late game, I think this might be worth it. But I think besides that, it's just a decent removal spell in game 1. So a kind of mid to high pick for us in Draft and Sealed. Moving on here, we have Fire Elemental. Kind of an oldie but a goodie. A 5-mana 5/4 Elemental. That's it. 5 mana 5/4s are, it's pretty gravy. I think this is fine for Draft and Sealed. Of course, do not use it in Standard. Moving up here, we have Fire Fist Adept, a 5-mana 3/3 human wizard. When Fire Fist Adept enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature and opponent controls, where X is the number of wizards you control. So this is kind of interesting. If we get into a lot of wizards in Draft and Sealed, this card is really, really good. Maybe doing at least 2, maybe 3 points of damage to a target creature. So 5 mana 3/3 dealing 2 to 3 points of damage. That's pretty good, honestly. But for Standard, of course, this is just too expensive, and I would not see this being in the Standard pool at all. Next up, we have the First Eruption. This art here, this tapestry art. So good, so good. A 3-mana Enchantment Saga. Chapter 1 here, the First Eruption deals 1 damage to each creature without flying, so basically a board wipe for the air if there are, 1 toughness. Chapter 2 here, add 2 red mana to our mana pool, so it ramps this even. And Chapter 3, sacrifice a mountain. If you do, the First Eruption deals 3 damage to each creature, so it basically goes from a kind of board wide ping to mana, and then an even bigger board wide ping. I love this card. It's a rare, of course, so you're not going to see that much in Draft and Sealed, so It's one of the rare cards that I feel like should have been an uncommon. Like, it's just so close. It's like, man, it could be an uncommon. It could be, you know, because it's kind of slow in how it ramps up. But besides that, I think this card is very good. I don't think you'll see any kind of standard play, perhaps, but I do think in Draft and Sealed, if you get into this, you might want to be pushing into red if you have any kind of extra red cards in your draft pool. Moving up here, we have the Flamecale. This is a 2-mana enchantment saga. Chapter 1, discard your hand. Whoa. Chapter 2, draw 2 cards. That's nice. And Chapter 3, if a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage +2 to that permanent or player instead. So this is actually really interesting in the like mid to late game in a draft and sealed pool. So let's say you're out of gas, you draw into this, you actually discard your hand, you don't have a hand to discard, then you draw 2 cards, which means you draw 3 cards the next turn, which is fantastic for you. And then the last one is you actually get to do extra damage if you have any like spells or creatures on the stack, which is really nice. So I think this is a nice pick here for draft and sealed, but kind of interesting that I don't think this will be a good pick at all for standard if you want to play it in there. Moving on here, we have Frenzied Rage. This art here is fantastic. This is a 2-mana enchantment or enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has menace. Feels like it should have had first strike and menace, but menace is fine too. This is a great card. This is a card you want to put on that 1/1 that we talked about earlier. A great common and just a good, you know, overall aura to grab in your sealed and draft pool. Moving on here, we have G2 Chronicler. It is a 2-mana 1/3 human wizard with a kicker for 4. So, you know, it's 6 mana. Doing math there really quickly in my head. 6 mana for a kicker here. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So if it's not kicked, it's just a 2-mana 1/3. So those can be okay because of the 3 toughness there, so they can be decent blockers in the early game. But if it was kicked for 6, it can get back an instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard. So it can get back maybe like a removal spell if you really need it. So it is interesting in that way. And it is a common, so you will run into this relatively soon or quickly in your draft and sealed pool. Next up, we have the G2 Journey Mage serving that hot pizza. That's all I see is him like moving pizza. It's a 3-mana 3/2 human wizard. When Journey Mage enters the battlefield, if you control another wizard, G2 Journey Mage deals 2 damage to each opponent. This is interesting. I like that it's a 3/2. It's a 3-mana 3/2. That's pretty gravy for me for draft and sealed. I like that a lot. And dealing extra damage if you control a wizard is just fine too. I think this is okay as a nice common pick for draft and sealed. Moving up here, we have G2 Lava Runner. This is another G2 here. It's a 1-mana 1/2 human wizard. As long as there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, the Lava Runner gets +1/+0 and has haste. This is kind of one of those rare exceptions where you want to pick a nice 1-drop in draft and sealed. It's just a really good 2-mana 2/2 that can get in for some damage in the mid to late game. The problem here is, of course, is that it's the mid to late game, so they might have some larger creatures. So that is kind of concerning for me. I do think this might be a more interesting card, maybe in standard, kind of put around something else for instant sorcery speed cards. But besides that, I think this card is decent as a common slot for like maybe a mid to low pick in draft and sealed. Moving up here, we have Goblin Barrage, a 4-mana sorcery with kicker, sacrifice an artifact or a goblin. Goblin Barrage deals 4 damage to target creature. If this spell was kicked, it deals 4 damage also to target player or planeswalker. So again, this is one of those new cards where it actually has the redirection rule here. And I think for 4 mana, if you have an artifact or a goblin on the battlefield, this card is actually pretty much worth it for that 4 mana kick, because it actually can do 4 damage to a creature and 4 damage to you or your opponent and a planeswalker. So this is worth it to me. I think this is quite a good card in draft and sealed. Of course, for standard, not probably going to see any kind of play since it is 4 mana. A little bit slow there. Next up, we have Goblin Chain Whirler. Love this art here. It's a 3 red mana 3/3 Goblin Warrior with first strike. When Chain Warrior enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. This is really interesting because, again, it's a rare, so it's going to be one of those rare cards you get into as your opening pack or something like that, or maybe one person would pass it to you in pack 3, because that's happened to me before. A random rare that's really good gets past you in pack 3. This is a great card. A 3-mana 3/3 with first strike is like just baller status straight up right there. But then when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. That's just gravy. So I think this card is very, very good. Of course, if you get into it in draft and sealed, you probably want to go into red. If not, you probably want to go into, or if you get passed into it, you want to go into red, maybe. But again, it is 3 red mana, so it might be a little bit more expensive than you're willing to bear. For like standard, of course, I think the Goblin Tribal deck is kind of coming together. It's kind of coming together in a big way. Or this just goes into, you know, the mono red like aggro deck. I think this is a great inclusion for that deck as well. Moving up here, we have Goblin War Chief, a 3-mana 2/2. Goblin spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast, and goblins you control have haste. Again, another good goblin deck, or card for our goblin deck in Standard. In Draft and Sealed, if you get into a lot of goblins, this card is just, you know, icing on the cake. I think this card is very, very good, especially giving everything haste as well if they're goblins. But a 3-mana 2/2, again, on face value is not that good to me. I would like to have a little bit more, maybe a 2/3 for something like that for Draft. In this particular Draft format, I think it's a little too weak on that side. But of course, it can weaken the spells that we get to cast, or make them less expensive, of course. So I think that has that going for it. So I think it's good for that specific situation in Standard. But for Draft and Sealed, if you get into a lot of goblins, this is good. If you don't, it's very situational. So if you're getting into them, I would definitely get into this as like a cherry on top. Next up here, we have the Haphazard Bombardment, a 6-mana enchantment. Lots of text here. When it enters the battlefield, choose 4 non-enchantment permanents you don't control and put an aim counter on them. At the beginning of your end step, 2 or more permanents you don't control have an aim counter on them. Destroy one of those permanents at random. So this is very interesting for 6 mana. Basically, it's choosing 4 things on your opponent's side of the field and randomly destroying each one until they have, you know, just 1 left on the battlefield for 6 mana. So it's interesting. I like that it's actually non-enchantment permanents, because this can destroy creatures, artifacts, and even planeswalkers, sadly, or, you know, in a good way, actually. That's really interesting, but of course, you know, red can't interact with enchantments for whatever reason, so non-enchantment permanents here. I think this card is quite good if you get into it as a rare in Draft and Sealed. For Standard, way too expensive, and just kind of a little crazy expensive, and random, of course. Random is not a good thing for Standard. Moving up here, we have Jaya Ballard. This is a 5-mana, 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker Jaya. +1, add 3 colorless or 3 red mana to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast instant or sorcery spells. +1 again, discard up to 3 cards, then draw that many cards. And -8, you get an emblem with, quote, you may cast instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard. If a card cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So basically giving your graveyard flashback, which is interesting to me. This is super interesting. I'm not so hot on this being in a Draft or Sealed format. I think this card is actually actively kind of bad for that format. I mean, it can ramp you, which is nice, but only for instant and sorcery spells. As far as Standard goes, again, it's kind of one of those cards where it's like, I need to see it with other stuff, because it's 3 red mana and then 2 colorless, so it's kind of expensive to get out on the battlefield. It's got a nice level of like loyalty when it comes into the battlefield, but it's only useful for instant sorcery spells, so it's like maybe it's good in an Izzet deck or maybe a Grixis deck, sort of. It's just kind of one of those cards where it's like, I need to see this in a deck, in a brew, like working for me to like have it click. I think the +1 here though, to discard up to 3 cards and then draw that many cards, is nice for filtering. So if you do get this into your Draft and Sealed pool, it would be good for the +1 there for the filtering option. Moving on here, we have Jaya's Immolating Inferno, an X and 2 red legendary sorcery. Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. That's actually not that bad at all. So basically, you could pay 5 mana and deal 3 damage to up to 3 different targets. That's pretty decent. Again, it's a rare. I wish it was probably not a rare, maybe like an uncommon. It seems a little expensive for what it's trying to do. It's not a complete board wipe, so that is something that's interesting. But if you have a lot of mana in the mid to late game, then this card is going to be a blowout for our opponent. Wish it did the opponent and wish it did target creatures and opponent, but keep in mind it says 3 targets. That does mean we can do creature, planeswalker, and opponent, not just creature or something like that. So it's interesting for that as well. Moving on here, we have Keldon Overseer, a 3-mana 3/1 human warrior with kicker for 4 with haste. So a 3-mana 3/1 with haste is okay. Again, the 1 toughness here makes it a bit harder to like stomach for myself. But if we pay that extra 4 mana, it enters a battlefield, and if it was kicked, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn. That's pretty decent for us. I think this is what is this, 7 mana to do that. So getting a 7 mana, getting a 3/1, and then taking control over an opponent's creature, that could be a decent way to close out a match for us. But at the same time, it's 7 mana. It's just very difficult to get there sometimes, especially in Draft and Sealed, where it's kind of a race to the bottom. So I like this card for the 3/1 hasty kind of a little bit, but I don't like the the 1 toughness. But if we can pay the 7 mana to get the trigger here for the kicker, I think this card is a lot better in that situation. But again, getting to 7 mana is very hard to do in Draft and Sealed sometimes. Moving on, we have Keldon Raider, a 4-mana 4/3. That alone is pretty decent. And when it enters a battlefield, you may discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. This is like a really good bread and butter card for us for the actual like draft and sealed pool. Not going to be played in standard at all, but like, you know, a 4-mana 4/3 is decent, and being able to kind of cycle a card is nice as well. Moving on from here, we have Keldon Warcaller, a 2-mana 2/2 human warrior, just a bear for short. Whenever Keldon Warcaller attacks, put a lore counter on target saga you control. So this can actually ramp your saga counters on an enchantment saga you actually control, which is interesting, but at the same time, a lot of the sagas, you know, after they hit 3, they sacrifice themselves or something like that, and most often, you know, 1 and 2 are more interesting than 3, so I don't really know about this card per se. I think this card is just fine as a 2/2 bear in red, so if you want to have this in your deck for sagas, that's fine. If not, it's just a 2/2 bear, and that's okay too. Not great, but it's not terrible. It's not like a 1/1, you know. Moving on here, we have Orcish Vandal. It's a 2-mana 1/1 Orc Warrior. Sacrifice Orcish Vandal, or sacrifice an artifact rather, not itself. Sacrifice an artifact. Orcish Vandal deals 2 damage to any target. Of course, that means creature, planeswalker, or opponent. This is fine, I think. If you get into a lot of artifacts and you have this on the battlefield, the Vandal can actually kind of ping an opponent to death if we have the actual artifact, you know, like in the battlefield, or enough artifacts on the battlefield. If not, we can actually just, you know, ping down our opponent's creatures until they're dead. I am sad, however, that it is a tap ability and not just an innate ability. I wish it was a static ability, but sadly it's tapped, so you can only do it once per turn, so that's kind of sad too, though. Moving on here, we have Radiating Lightning. Love the art here. 4-mana instant. Radiating Lightning deals 3 damage to target player and 1 damage to each creature that player controls. So another way to kind of, you know, ping our opponent's board state, but keep in mind it's only 1 point of damage, so it may not be enough damage to do anything. However, it is an instant, so we can do 3 damage to the opponent and 1 damage to everything they control. So if they attack in and we block, it might be good for us on the blocks. So this could be a great way to use this card as well. So I think this is fine as a common in draft and sealed. Of course, not going to see any kind of standard play. Moving up here, we have Rampaging Cyclops, a 4-mana 4/4 Cyclops. When was the last time we had a Cyclops in standard? Was that like Theros block? I think that's what it was. Rampaging Cyclops gets -2, -0 as long as 2 or more creatures are blocking it. So it's actually kind of got a weird reverse menace going on. Keep in mind it's -2, -0, so it's only becoming a 2/4, not a 2/2. That would be even more terrible. But it is a common also, so I think a 4-mana 4/4, if it can get in unblocked, it's fine. But if it does get blocked, it becomes weaker, which makes me kind of angry. I wish it was +2/+0 instead of that, or maybe like 3 mana instead of 4 mana for what its ability is trying to do. So kind of interesting. Not very hot on this card at all. So it's gonna be like a mid to low pick, probably like the last pick in a draft or sealed pool. Moving on here, we have Run Amok. This is a 2-mana instant. Target attacking creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. This is like basically a green card for 2 mana in red. This card is really, really good. I love this as a combat trick for red right now. One of the best ones, I think. And Trample, of course, is just icing on the cake. A very high pick for us for draft and sealed. Next up here, we have Seismic Shift, a 4-mana source where you destroy target land. Up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn. This is really interesting because, you know, we've always had the 4-mana destroy target land in like the draft and sealed sets, but it's actually doing something else here. Up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn. 2 target creatures? What? If our opponent is like, you know, an inch from death, this could be the card that actually changes that for us. So I think this card is very, very good and a good high pick for us for 4 mana. It's awesome. It kind of reminds me of the bird from Innistrad. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but very, very good card regardless. Not going to see standard play, of course, because it's too expensive, but in draft and sealed, this is a great combat trick on our play. Moving on here, we have Shivan Fire. I wish Shivan Dragon was in this set, but it's not, sadly. But we have Shivan Fire. Nice. It is a 1 red mana instant with kicker for 4 colorless. Shivan Fire deals 2 damage to target creature. If that spell was kicked, it deals 4 damage to that creature instead. So, you know, 1 mana to deal 2 or 5 mana to deal 4. I like the 1 mana deal 2. It's basically like a Magma Spray without the exile. That's fine. So I think this is probably a good enough pick for us in the early game, or in the early time of a draft, to be fairly okay in a main board in a deck. So kind of a like low to mid pick for me in draft and sealed. Moving on here, we have Siege Gang Commander. Fun card. I thought this card wasn't in like already rotation or in like Magic at all, but apparently it is before Commander was even a thing, so I was dumb on that on Twitter. 5 mana 2/2 Goblin. When it enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens. That's amazing. And we can pay to sacrifice a Goblin, and the Commander deals 2 damage to any target. Of course, again, that means a creature, a Planeswalker, or opponent's face. So this is really, really good for 5 mana. It creates a 2/2 for 5 mana, but it also gives us 3 other dudes. So as a rare here, this card makes 4 creatures. It can actually, if we have enough mana, we can just start pinging 2 points anywhere, which is great. So again, this is another card that I think that might push a standard Goblin deck over the edge if they want to play the Commander. Moving up here, we have Skirk Prospector, a 1 red mana Goblin, 1/1. Sacrifice a Goblin, add red to your mana pool. This card is insane. Why is this card in this set? This card is also a common? What? This card is so good, guys. In Draft and Sealed, if you have a lot of goblins, this is a great way to ramp into your big bombs, if you can. In Standard, this is definitely going in a goblin deck for, you know, just a ramp, as well as feed into something else or another ability like the Commander ability. This card is so good. I don't understand why this card is here. It's so good. It's also being, you know, a good card for Modern as well. I think this card is really here for the Modern pool for that goblin deck in Modern. Just a super fun card. Moving on here, we have Shizik. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a 4 mana 5/3 elemental with kicker for 1. Trample and haste. At the beginning of your instep, if it wasn't kicked, sacrifice it. So we can pay 5 mana to have a 5/3 trample haster, which is not bad at all. Or we can just pay 4 mana to have a trample haster that is sacrificed at the end step. So I think this is fine. We probably will always pay the kicker here for this specific one. The kicker here is actually cheap enough that we want to pay it. So 5 mana 5/3 trample haste, that's actually not too bad. Can be a great way to trade with an opponent's good creature or a creature that they're blocking with, or just get in some final damage thanks to that trample, of course. Moving on from here, we have Squee the Immortal. This is a 3 mana 2/1 legendary creature goblin. You may cast Squee the Immortal from the graveyard or from exile. So if this is a rare card in your pack in Draft and Sealed, congratulations, you have the immortal card that never dies. So this card is very, very good. I think in Standard as well, this card is going to see a lot of play too. Great sack outlet and a great way to kind of like work around removal. Very interesting as well. I love this card a lot. I think this card is going to see a ton of play in Standard, and we'll probably see a lot of play in Draft and Sealed if it gets pulled in packs. Moving on here, we have Two-Headed Giant, a 4 mana 4/4 giant warrior. Whenever Two-Headed Giant attacks, flip 2 coins. If both coins come up heads, Two-Headed Giant gains double strike until end of turn. If both coins come up tails, Two-Headed Giant gains menace until end of turn. So keep in mind, if it's that one is heads and one is tails, nothing happens. So that is something to keep in mind here. But a 4 mana 4/4 is actually very, very good. And a 4 mana 4/4 that gives you, like, you know, a randomizer of menace or double strike is amazing. I love this card a lot. I wish there was more flip coins like abilities in Standard right now, and Two-Headed Giant kind of fills that niche for me. It's super fun. I love this card, and it's going to be a very high draft pick. And it is also a rare, of course, so you won't see too much of it, but I think in Standard this card might be fun as well. Moving on here, we have Valda, Keeper of the Flame, a 3 mana 3/2 legendary creature human shaman. It is an uncommon. At the beginning of your comment on your turn, for each aura and equipment attached to the Keeper of the Flame, create a 3/1 elemental creature token with trample and haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. So this is awesome for like Standard if we have a lot of enchantment auras kind of on this creature for the like is it auras list I'm trying to build. But it's also kind of good for Draft and Sealed if you can get 2 or 3 or even just 1 or 2 onto Valduk here, because it creates 3/1 hasters, which is awesome for us. And keep in mind, there are auras out there that give First Strike or Vigilance or Lifelink or whatever, or even just +2/+2. I think this card is just fine with that as well. So I think this card overall is very, very good and a nice high pick if you're in red and have lots of enchantment auras in your deck list. Moving on here, we have Varric's Bladewing. This is a 4 mana 4/4. This is a mythic here, so you're probably never going to see this in a Draft or Sealed pool. It's got kicker for 3 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create Karek's Bladewing, a legendary 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So a 4 mana 4/4 that creates another 4 mana 4/4 or another 4/4 flyer, which is not bad. That's only for 3 extra mana. So basically 7 mana, create 2 4/4. So I think if you have this in like Standard, you're probably not going to play it at all. Maybe in Brawl, because it is kind of one of those like commander friendly kind of cards for sure. But I do think in like Draft and Sealed, if you get into this as your mythic, it's a fun mythic because it does make 2 4/4s. If you get into 7 mana, again 7 mana is kind of high to get into. But 4 mana 4/4 is just fine. It's a flyer too. So this is also kind of a good bomb if you get into that as well. Next up here we have Warcry Phoenix, a 4 mana 2/2 Phoenix uncommon with flying and haste. And whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may pay 3 mana. If you do, return Warcry Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. This is an uncommon, ladies and gentlemen. The power creep is real. This card is super good. I think this card will see a lot of play in Draft and Sealed. Just a really high uncommon pick. Might be better than some rares in some of your packs here. Just a really, really good flyer, and it can also come back whenever we need it to if we have more creatures attacking out in Draft and Sealed. And this card is amazing for me. Moving on here, we have Warlord's Fury, a 1 mana sorcery. Creatures you control gain First Strike until end of turn. Creatures, so the entire board, draw a card. This is very, very good. Like the art on this card. It's very kind of like old school art as well. Like this card a lot. I think this card will see a lot of play in Draft and Sealed because it's basically like saying if they decide to block this turn, we're just going to give everything first strike. So the trades are, basically to our advantage. We also get to draw a card because this card is insane. And the last card in red here, guys, is Wizard's Lightning. This is a 3-mana instant. This spell costs 2 colorless less to cast if you control a wizard, so basically Lightning Bolt here. Wizard's Lightning deals 3 damage to any target. So again, that's the target is a creature, planeswalker, or the opponent. So I think this card is super good. Again, if you get into a lot of wizards in the actual pool here in Draft and Sealed, this is going to be a very high pick for you. Even if it's not, in a wizard list here for Draft and Sealed, it's still a 3-mana deal 3 damage to any target. So I still think that's good enough to be a very high pick for you in Draft and Sealed. This will also be a great card for us as well in an Izzet, like wizard list maybe, in Standard as well, so keep in mind for that. But that is all of the red cards here for Dominaria. The next one coming out, I think, is green. I think that's right. Green is the next one. But I'm getting these out as quickly as I possibly can, and then right after that will be a pre-release video talking about the top picks for pre-release for Sealed and Draft only. I'm not talking about kind of like generally like this. So keep in mind for that, and like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next set review color.